Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host today, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the TV show in Jack Reacher Season 2. Now, I think like a lot of people, I was completely unaware of the Jack Reacher novel series. In fact, I had first heard about the character through the movie that came out back in 2012 with Tom Cruise called Jack Reacher. I had no idea, again, like I said before, about the book series, but I do remember one distinct thing that I had learned about prior to watching the movie that I actually purposely avoided just because I didn't want to have any preconceived notions at all. And one of the things I remember distinctly was the fact that a lot of people were complaining that Tom Cruise was too small for the part. And I just remember thinking, like, are you fucking serious? Because have you not seen him in the Mission Impossible movies? Like, he's amazing in those films. And I don't remember people complaining about his height or his weight, for that matter, for that role. So I just remember reading a brief little headline about that and just completely ignored it after the fact because I was like, I'm not going to read this shit and then watch the movie and have like some critics point out the flaws of the physicality of Tom Cruise in watching this movie. I just did not understand that concept at all. It just made no sense for me. Again, not knowing anything about the book series. And then when I saw the movie, I remember it was pointing out as that based on the book One Shot written by Lee Child. And I thought, oh, this is based on a book. No idea. So I saw the movie, loved it. I think that was a great movie. And when I heard they were making it into a movie franchise, I was all for it. And then after I saw the first film, I had started digging a little deeper to get a better understanding of what the overall book series was about. And essentially, it's just a man who is just minding his own business, wants to travel the country, and then along the way, trouble seems to find him. He has to get himself out of it, along with saving some of the people along the way, and then save the day, move on with his day after that. And for some reason, that concept really appealed to me. And I'll never forget when it was kind of described that way, when I read more or less what the characters were about in a nutshell. I remember thinking at the time, like, this sounds like a great TV show rather than a movie series, because the fact that they made the first movie, Jack Reacher, off a book called One Shot, which I found out later on was not the very first book of the series. I remember thinking, like, just imagine how much they had to cut out, condense, combine to turn it into a 2.5 hour film, which is still a great movie. But I just remember thinking, like, they could have expanded on so many other details that probably would have made the film much better as far as making it into a TV show is concerned. And then I remember thinking, like, just imagine what we got in the movie with an actor who can actually look the part, be physical, and also pull off the acting as well too, but make it into a weekly series. I just thought, like, that would be a perfect fucking action show that I would have killed for back in the 90s, because as someone who grew up watching these type of movies, the films from the 80s and 90s with the Schwarzenegger, Stallone, the Van Dammes, the Dolph Lundgren, just to name a few, I just thought, like, this would have been a great idea for a TV show, and that's the first thing they should have done. But the fact that the second film had come out, the Jack Reacher Never Go Back, which is a film that I did enjoy, nowhere near as much as the first film. I don't think it's nowhere near as bad as a lot of people make it seem like. But I just remember thinking that, well, since the movie didn't do well in theaters and they obviously wanted to make this into a movie franchise, this is a great opportunity to snatch it and make it into a TV show. And I'm so glad they did, because at that point, Amazon announced that they're going to make it into a TV show. And they did hire Alan Ritchson to play the part of Jack Reacher, who then, when I saw the first image of him as Jack Reacher, I was like, this is perfect. And I love that first season. And in season 2, which as of this recording, the last episode aired for me last night, I checked it out, loved it. There's so much about this TV show, especially the second season, that I cannot wait to get into here with, because this is basically described as, this is the type of show for dads that grew up watching these 80s and action 90s film, and this show is written for them. I am not the type of person that believes that if you are this type of person, or if you're into this, or if you're into that this thing will be meant for you. I don't necessarily believe in that concept so much, because, you know, I find stuff that I did not think I would like and turn out to love. So I just think that this is one of the very rare occasions where the idea that if you love these type of movies, this show is meant for you. And I'm happy to be a part of that clip, because I love everything about the show. It is not a perfect show by any means at all, so I'll be the first to admit that. But the thing about this show that I will say, though, is that everything that we've seen before in these type of films with the Stallones and the Schwarzeneggers is very much prevalent in this movie as well too. But the fact that it matters is that you have the time to take with the characters in developing the story, in developing characters, and understanding that a lot of these characters we've seen before in these type of shows and films and whatever else, that although they may be cliche, but they all have a purpose for the overall narrative to fit the story and tell a great story at the end of the day. And that's all that really matters to me. But you also get the wonderful, more or less icing on the cake with, you have the guy in Jack Reacher, who is the typical action hero that we've seen in these type of movies with the Stallones and Schwarzeneggers, but you get that in a TV show and he's actually awesome. And I love that about the show. So much to get into here, but I will say here though that because the show just ended season 2 as of last night, as of this recording, I may get some aspects of the spoilers here. So if you have not seen the season 2 in its entirety as of yet and don't want to get spoiled at all here, I recommend you guys pause this review, check out the series, and then come on back and we'll pick up from where we last left off here. So I'll get into the plot synopsis, then I'll get into my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. As the team closed in on Langston, 2 members of the 110th face danger, compelling Reacher to devise a dangerous plan to rescue them. Reacher and Neagley make a final desperate attempt to save O'Donnell and Dixon to stop AM and avenging their friend's murder. And that right there is season 2 in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with this second season is something that I pointed out before in the introduction of my review for this show, is that I would have killed for a show like this as a kid growing up. Because the one thing I will say about the action genre is that, you know, back in the 80s and 90s, like those type of films with like Demolition Man, Cobra, Tango and Cash, Commando, what else, Predator, you know, just a number of different of the films that we've all come to love. If you take those type of shows, take those type of movies and put it into a TV format, I still think those movies, and as far as those characters are concerned, would have worked in a TV show. But considering the time that those films had come out, you have to understand, like, HBO, Showtime were nowhere near the level that they are at now, where you have quality TV shows shot like a movie, told in an episodic format, but tell an effective story and interesting at that, with great action set pieces. Like I'm going to use Wu Assassin as an example, where I mean, it's been a while since I've seen the first season, but I remember loving the story. And I also remember that the action set pieces were just incredible. I just love what I saw in that show. And I remember thinking, like, if we can get more of that, can you imagine, like, you know, the next level of action set pieces that we got in that first season that we can get in the second season, which would then, I'm hoping, would influence another set of producers and people behind the scenes that will say, well, we got to do that, and let's just try to make it better now. So, like anything else, you take one thing that's really good and you try to expand on it, make it better and better, but not try to make it bigger and better, but just make it a better story overall. And that's one thing I love about the John Wick series, is that each film keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but as it gets bigger, there's a purpose for why there's so many more characters involved, and why the lore is so thick with a richness of an environment that we are not familiar with at all. But when you are learning about it along the way, it makes sense for the overall narrative, which is why when each film keeps continuing, there you find out there's a much bigger world out there, but the way that it's exposed to you, the way that is shown to you, it makes sense as it progresses from there. And I felt like with this particular series here in Jack Reacher, that the type of movies that I grew up watching is exactly with what I always wanted with this show, where you get a guy that we've all seen before, a big, tall, muscular guy who minds his own business, doesn't want to bother anybody, but gets thrown into this mix of trouble that he has to get himself out of here. And then along the way, has to save some people. And then once he solves the problem and saves everyone from all the chaos that was ensuing at that point and moves on with his day, it's not a very hard plot to follow here. But what's interesting is that for me, when you get a character of that sort, spending time with him, you get to see that what you see is what you get. And in the first season, you learn a little bit about his background through flashbacks, and to some points of him pointing out certain details along the way about himself that he keeps very limited. Now, in the second season, what I was concerned with this particular season was that I thought that the whole team aspect of it, where some of his crew members from the 110th that he had served with in the military had been killed, and in the beginning of the second season, and then having the remaining members come back together, I should say, and work together as a team to solve the murder of their friends. And then you find out there's a lot more to the story as we follow through here, that the whole concept of a team approach, that where everyone has to work together for them to solve the crime, with Reacher more or less being in the lead, I was concerned about that because I just thought it was going to dilute everything we got in the first season. But in fact, I actually thought it made the show the second season even better in terms of us learning about Reacher as a person, because everyone in that crew, as far as the remaining members are concerned, points out the exact same thing that they all seen about Reacher, that they know about Reacher, and they poke fun at him as well too. And you get to see that Reacher isn't just some. I mean, you do get that in the first scene where he's not some robotic guy. He's actually a person. He's a real human being going through some experiences. Although he's able to come on top in most cases here, but in here there's a certain vulnerability that you get to see about this character through his friends that they point out about him and teasing him and making fun of him. Not to the point where they're teasing him to disrespect him, but just poke fun at the guy. And you get to see a form of vulnerability where he's just kind of just like taking it, where it's like he knows what they're pointing out is true and they're just making it funny along the way. At the same time, even though everyone has the exact same opinion about him as who they see as a person, every one of them has a certain perspective about him that they point out in those finer details that they have in spending time with him, that you get to see in one character pointing out certain details that another character does not point out, but they point out other details about Reacher that other characters don't bring out at all. So it's an interesting set of perspective of different characters pointing out about one guy in Jack Reacher, but all consistent with few minor details along the way that's different from one another because of the different angles they get from Reacher, that they are able to spend time with him because of whatever situation that they're in, that they get to learn more about Reacher along the way. So it's a very interesting perspective and interesting angle that took on the show that I thought would not work. I thought it was going to water down everything that we got in the first season to this second season here, and in fact made it even better. It actually enriched the lore of Jack Reacher, that I'm sure the novels do obviously a really good job because they have all the time in the world to describe all that information. But in this particular case here, I really did appreciate the fact that we get some additional characters that help fill in the gaps for you to understand that what you see is what you get, but here's some interesting insight about him that you would never know about unless we tell you about it, and then it's all true. I love that aspect of the story that I really thought worked effectively for the second season. Now, I will also point out too that this whole team aspect of this narrative here that we follow, I felt like it got better and better each and every episode, because again, the first 3 episodes that dropped when it debuted the second season back in December, I really did enjoy it, but it was one of those things where it slowly started to progress for me, where each episode kept getting better and better and better, and the stakes were getting higher and higher and higher. And the characters that we were starting to get to know, where I got perspective on certain things where I expected a certain thing to happen and didn't necessarily happen the way that I thought it would, or some things that we've seen before that we know this guy's the bad guy, he's gonna get killed. We all know that at the end of the day, the villain is gonna get murked. We just know that. How it leads up to that, in my opinion, was the way that's the most important. They've done a really good job in establishing pretty early on, and then when you get to that conclusion at the end, it all closes out perfectly, in my opinion. So I always felt like that all the actors, the writers, the directors, the cinematographers, all the remaining cast and crew, every single one of these people, in my opinion, have done a really good job in doing the story justice, with the characters and telling an effective story with great performances. In a lot of ways, we've seen these tropes before, but can you still make it entertaining and interesting to have the audience invested? At the end of the day, for me, the answer to that question is always yes, because I feel like, in my opinion, that season 2 is slightly better than season 1 in terms of explaining the lore of Jack Reacher, but at the same time, you get to spend with the other characters and learning about them along the way. Because what happens at the end of the season is where, apart from the fact that they do solve the crime as far as the murder of their friends, we also get a wonderful conclusion to each respective character as far as like their own personal journey in this particular narrative that we're following here. Because it's not just about saving the day and then we all go our separate ways. No, there's a personal touch to each one of those stories that we follow here, where it's not just it's not done empty-handed. It's not done with empty calories. There's actually a purpose for that. And then Reacher is the center of it all, where he really does go out of his way to make sure that all his friends are well taken care of here, and you understand why they are loyal to him and why they are friends with him and why they all consider each other as family, even though they haven't talked to each other in over a decade, if I recall correctly. But they're able to pick up from where they last left off, and you can see why the relationship is so strong and why their foundation has been established early on, for you get to see in the forms of flashback, where I thought it was going to be kind of an annoying aspect of the show, but in fact it actually helped better understand the relationship and how that relationship was established and why it remained strong through all these years, despite the wide gap of not communicating with each other for quite some time. So there's a wonderful arc to that story, because you have the time to develop that aspect of the relationship, so that way when you get to the end of the second season, everything closes off with a beautiful touch, in my opinion, that really pays off at the end. So I have nothing but high praise and when it comes to that aspect of the storytelling here. And I'll be honest too, the action set pieces here for me, as much as I did enjoy it, they're not my favorite thing about the show, and they're not bad by any means. So I'm not trying to disregard, that the fact that everything was working well in this, and the action scenes aren't really good. They are great. They really are good in my opinion. But the things I remember the most about the show, about the second season rather, in the show as well, I should say, is the characters and the journey they go through. The action set pieces are just the icing on the cake, but that's the thing I remember the least about it. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that the story is great, and that's all I care about. And you get that with, I'm as a guy who loves the action genre. I grew up with Stallone, so I've always admired those big, strong, muscular guys who are saving the day, because I always imagined an action hero to be that way. I still would like to see that, to be honest with you. And you get that with the show, and you have a good actor in Alan Ritchson who does the character justice, and not only does the character justice, but loves the character too. And you get to see that in his performance here. So I appreciate the hard work and the passion that goes into this show, because it does pay off at the end, because it's one of those things where it's lightning in a bottle. And considering that this is Amazon, I think, most successful show at this time, where it literally is the highest rated show they've ever gotten, and they're already working on season 3. The sky's the limit at this point here. So I have nothing but high hopes for what's going to be happening in season 3. And I think the people involved are going to be really smart about what they've been able to pull off in the first and second season, and what they can do to make this third season interesting, and have the stories and the characters development along the way too, to keep that, I would say, what's the best way to describe it, to keep that at a reasonable expectation, if that makes any sense here. So I can go off on a tangent about that here too. So yeah, so many great things I can say about the show. I will also point out too that as much as I did enjoy Robert Patrick, who is the villain in this show here, this will be kind of a segue into my negatives here, because I love Robert Patrick. I think he's a great actor, and he's an awesome actor for villains that he plays in a lot of these movies here. But the one thing about this show that I felt like was the weakest was actually the villain itself. So now let's get into my negatives. As I said before, leading into my negatives here, the villain in this show for me, or in this second season rather, was really the weakest thing about this show. But it's interesting for me to say that, because Robert Patrick, as I said before, is a great actor. He's really good in the part. But what's interesting for me is the fact that I've been accustomed with a lot of these movies where the heroes are the stars and the villains were just there to help the hero look good. And that's kind of more or less with what I got with this villain, where he's the bad guy, what he's going to do. There's nothing that you can really connect with him in terms of more like on a personal level or emotional level, if you will, where there's more to his story. He really is just about, I want a lot of money, I want to sell these weapons, and I'm going to go off and live my life, happy. And he doesn't care who he hurts along the way. That's basically it. I don't mind that at all. In fact, I think the way they were able to pull it off here in the show worked well. But because lately I've been very interested in seeing villains who have where they don't see themselves as villains. There's a lot more depth behind their motivation. That to me is much more interesting. I would have loved to see more of that with this character. But then you also have to understand too that the way that the show was paced out, and the way that you have time to spend with each respective character, the time that you spend with the villain, who's in this case with Robert Patrick playing Langley, it's an interesting thing because he's in the show, but not as much. It's not until later on in the second season where he comes out a little bit more. But even then, his involvement with the overall season is kind of spaced out sporadically throughout the entirety of the second season, which I thought was interesting because I would have liked to see more time with him. But understanding the fact that there's not a whole lot as far as what the villain is able to offer in terms of character depth, if you will, I could see where they've decided to kind of more or less focus on the heroes more, give them that kind of attention. And the villain, he serves his purpose, and we're going to give him the proper attention. But at that point, aside from that, that's really all he's going to do. That's kind of what I got from this character here. I didn't hate the guy. I didn't hate the character at all. I thought he was fine. I thought he worked well for the purpose of his reasons for being there. But overall, I always felt like the villain in this movie, and also the character of AM, who is another major character in this movie, in the show, in the second season, I should say, that he was being built up as something that I thought was going to be much bigger. And then at the very end of the second season, the only thing I got satisfaction out of him was the fact that he was like, this is all business for me. And they're like, okay, great. And they kill him. I got satisfaction out of his character dying, but I felt like he was being built up as something more, but it never went anywhere outside of that. So really, that's like the only real weak thing about this second season that I had a problem with. But even my problem with the second season, I understood it, because everything else, as far as I was concerned, made up for that. But that's really all I have here as far as my negatives are concerned. So for me, that's the end of my negatives. Now let's get into my rating. I'm going to say that I am just happy to be alive, to watch the things that I've always wanted as a kid that I'm able to see now as an adult. I pointed out before, with times I pointed out about growing up reading comic books as a kid and watching the cartoon shows as a kid with the superheroes that I've grown up reading, that we're finally getting movies that are taken at such a high level, where before the comic book films were more or less kind of like secondary to a lot of people. And the ones that have come out, only a handful of them were really, really that good. And then everything else was kind of just like, nowhere near as good. But then lately, in the last 10 plus years, we've gotten some great quality content when it comes to the superhero genre. Now, as much as I enjoy a lot of these films, me as an action fan, I've always wanted the type of show that I've gotten with these movies with Sylvester Stallone, like in Demolition Man. Cobra is a really good example of that, where imagine taking a character like that, but telling it in a weekly format, with the same level of production, and also in terms of the violence and the language, whatever else that we got from the movie, but tell it in a TV show episodic format. If we can do that, if we can just do that at least once, but do it right, I'll be happy with that. And that's what I'm getting with this show, Reacher. As a fan of the action genre, like, it's been described that this is the type of show for dads who grew up watching these type of movies. This show is meant for you, and I thoroughly do believe that as an action film lover, and to finally be able to watch a show that I've always wanted to see, this show offers that for me. So for me, I give the show a solid cheers. And those are my thoughts for Reacher Season 2. Now, I am one of those people that would never be opposed for a Reacher film off this series. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that Amazon knows they have a great thing going for them. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But there is no doubt that they are going to want to do a movie off this series one day. Now, I will also consider, too, that the people behind the scenes and Amazon as well, they're going to want to pull it off here. But if they do pull it off, what can they do to justify and why they should make a film in the first place? So I know that they're going to be working on some great stories to tell, because they have nearly 20 books off this book series that they can tell virtually with each season. So are they going to go for 10 seasons, 20 seasons? Who knows? But let's just say this here: they do, let's say 8 seasons, and they're going to close off the series with the 8 seasons here, and then they do a movie to cap it off here. Just think about how much anticipation and how much buildup they've had for the audience to be invested for so many years. And then at that point, they're going to say, we're going to have one more thing to cap this all off here, and we're going to make it an event, and it's going to be in the form of a movie. So that way now the audience says, well, I love the series, and if they're going to make a film, yeah, I'll be sure to go set the time for that, because this is going to be an event worth waiting for. And I think Amazon, with the right people involved, know they have to get the right things in place to get all that built up to more or less kind of do basically what Marvel did with the Avenger Endgame. And so they have to do something like that to really get to that point, and it's going to take some time. So I hope they're smart enough and wise enough to understand that let's take the time to build the story, and then we can do the final payoff with this film. And that's the best way, in my opinion, to go about it here. But I would love to hear all your all's thoughts. If you've seen Reacher, to say season 1 and season 2 in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, also subscribe to NRW and hit the notification while you're down there as well. And also follow NRW on social media, on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. You can follow me on my social media accounts, on Instagram, New Release, on Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and on Twitter, You're So Cool with WRM, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And that'll be it, guys. I hope you guys enjoy this review, and I thank you all for checking it out. And until next time, stay safe out there, and cheers.